Hey guys, welcome back again to my channel. This time we're going to talk about Lamia Vampire Covenant list. So I'm going a bit through the bloodlines and proposing some interesting lists for each of them. Currently I'm still reorganizing my home, so I still have to get my table out again, and then at that point I can also show you some deployment tips and tricks. But for now we'll just keep it to some list discussions. So this is going to be the Lamia list. It has a vampire count on a monstrous revenant with Mask of Innocence, with Legend of the Black King on heavy armor with a shield, and paired weapons with blessed inscriptions and the Obsidian Rock. Then we have a Necromancer Wizard Adept on Avocation with the Unholy Tome. We have a Banshee, we have some Ghouls, some Skeletons, some Zombies, some Bat Swarms, and then to round it off we have the Dark Coach, Court of the Damned, some Wraiths and a Shrieking Horror. I'll go through the different choices why they are included in this list. So let's first start with the character setup. For Vampire Covenant, this is quite a Magic Light setup with only 2 Wizard Adepts. However, I feel like it is enough also because you still have the Unholy Tome to support the magic phase. So the magic here, you don't really have it to improve the combat performance of your pieces, because you're basically relying on the rates, on the vampire count, on the monstrous revenant, the Shrieking Horror you have as an anti-monster tool, and then the Dark Coach is quite independent in itself. So the magic, you mostly use it to give power to the rates. So you're trying to force through a movement spell. So with the Unholy Tome and with the Raven's Wing combined, you have 2 spells that can allow for some movement. Obviously, your opponent in this list can still counteract it by dispelling your Unholy Tome first, and then dispelling the Raven's Wing. However, you can spend already 3 dice on the Unholy Tome to cast it at an 8+. If your opponent then already decides not to dispel it, then you got your movement already. If he does, he's going to lose at least 3 dice normally. And then you will have probably a situation where you can cast Raven's Wing uncontested. Because, well, there's not a lot of situations where your opponent has 7 dispel dice. So you're not even gonna be in the situation where you have to cast Raven's Wing on 5 dice, likely. So alternatively, you could go for a Necromancer Wizard Master on Avocation, so you can also have Danse Macabre as an actual spell on a wizard. You would have to get rid of the Banshee or some other valuable points in the list. I think this is the setup that I would prefer, but that would also come down to playing the list a bit. Otherwise, the vampire count has the Lamia Bloodline. This means that the vampire gains lightning reflexes. You get -1 attack value, unfortunately. But enemy units in base contact with the vampire suffers -1 agility. And you start out at agility 7 or 8, I believe. If the vampire is not equipped with heavy armor or a shield, it gains distracting. On this build, I do have it just because the well, basically on the Monstrous Revenant, you are balancing between having a 3 up armor save or distracting, and I think in general, with a model that can be targeted individually, the 3 up armor save is quite valuable. Duels issued by the vampire must be accepted by a character unless the champion accepts first, and enemy model parts without harnessed in a duel with the vampire suffer -1 attack value. So you're quite good at dueling. You're quite good at getting the duel there. So yeah, it makes sense to put this guy on a mount, because the mount just benefits also from being in the duel, as it will just offer some extra attacks. You could go for Dragon. The Dragon is quite expensive, and you're not allowed to put any defensive buffs on a Dragon. I think a Monstrous Revenant is a bit better here, because you can still hide it a bit easier also. And yeah, it's basically all you need in a challenge. You're looking for a model that can do on champions 1 wound +3 overkill. Monstrous infantry, you would like to be able to do the total of 6 combat res. And on characters, yeah, if you don't kill them fully in one round of combat, it's not even that bad. It's just static combat rest that's going to be a bit of an issue there. Then otherwise, what kind of setup have I gone for? So with the Monstrous Revenant and Vampire itself, you already cause fear. Mask of Innocence is a Lamia specific power that makes it so that enemy units in base contact suffer -1 discipline. You can still combine this also with the evocation Whispers of the Veil for a total of -3 discipline. So whereas some units might be taking steadfast checks and passing them quite regularly, you're now looking at a total of -3 discipline, which is quite big if you get the evocation spell through. So even if your opponent starts out at discipline 9 steadfast, it's going to be discipline 6 steadfast if you manage to make him take a break test. Then the Monstrous Revenant is obviously has Swift Stride, so you're going to be able to break units in places where opponents might not expect you to, and then you're going to be able to chase them down quite effectively normally. Bad Weapons, Blessed Inscriptions. Blessed Inscriptions is just a way to guarantee your damage output, because any type of reroll just I believe it's quite underrated, because if you do the maths behind it, then it might compare quite well against some other things, like Titanic Might, for example. That gives +3 strength against some matchups, but then again, Blessed Inscriptions also protects you from these very bad die rolls where you just roll 5 ones or so. And that's also a really powerful aspect of a reroll. Then we have the Necromancer, and Necromancer is on evocation for Whispers of the Veil, basically. And Spectral Blades is really good, giving you an anti-armor spell with reroll to wound combined. It gives you some Veil tokens in the end. And yeah, probably in most matchups you can take your Hereditary and Whispers. There might be some matchups where you take the Hereditary and Spectral Blades. For example, if your opponent is just fearless all over, then yeah, it depends. Then we have the Banshee. The Banshee is in there to go in a block of core units, one of the core units, so either the skeletons or the ghouls, and that makes it such that if you charge with the unit, the opponent has to take a terror test, and it also makes sure that the opponent has to fight a Banshee. So the Banshee is just a very cheap chaff piece, basically. With the Vampire being on the Monstrous Revenant, you have a commanding presence of 18 inches, so you don't really have to worry about the Banshee being able to march or not. He can march out, he can do d6+1 strength 4 hits on some kind of chaff unit. And actually he's quite point efficient at that, because you can just march up to a unit, have a scream at it, and then either the unit is gone or not. If it isn't gone, it might be able to charge into the Banshee, but you will be completely fine with that probably. And if he doesn't, then you have a chaff piece out to delay your opponent. Then we'll go to the core setup. So the core, we have some ghouls, a big unit. We have a big unit of skeletons. We have a unit of zombies for the Necromancer to hide in, and we have 2 units of bat swarms. This comes out to, I believe, 1130 points, more or less, maybe a bit more, but somewhere around there. So it is quite a decent filling core setup, in the sense that you don't really overspend too much points. Then we have the ghouls. Basically you have 2 big scoring bricks, and these are going to be your scoring in the list, so you're a little bit low on scoring. The zombies are also scoring, but I wouldn't really regard them in this aspect, because they are going to just be in your backlines. For Capture the Flags, it's quite convenient to have 3 scoring units, because then your opponent cannot choose an extra unit to kill in order to get the objective. And once your zombies are going to be destroyed, you're doing badly anyway. So, why the ghouls and the skeletons? They perform quite different roles in the list. So the skeletons are really going to be a tar pit. So they're going to be 5 wide. You're going to have the Legion Standard in there for a static combat res of 3 ranks, a banner, and another rank, so that's 5. Yeah, they're just gonna be there forever basically. The Necromancer can still bump up the starting size at the start of the game with some cheap to cast arises, so you can cast this on one die and see what happens. And the Ghouls, on the other hand, they are a bit more offensive. Um, so probably I would field the Court of the Damned in the Ghouls, or well, it depends basically on the matchup. You can also put the Court in the Skeletons to give them a bit more hitting power, and basically give the Court +5 combat res and damage immunity from war machines and stuff, except for some cannons. But yeah, the Ghouls they perform a bit better in the damage output part with 2 attacks each. The 32 are big enough to be able to field them in Horde and dominate in that way. I don't know if I really would want to play them in the middle of the board because there are some counters to Ghouls that they don't really like. Anything with a high armor save, they're not too fond of. And they only are tough resilience 4 without any saves. So the Court of the Damned does help with the agility of the Ghouls, because Ghouls start out already at an agility of 4. So basically with the Court they go to agility 6, which means that they strike quite quickly indeed. And there's quite a lot of units that don't really want 32 Ghouls banging on their heads. Yeah, so that's the core setup basically. You have the Skeletons to form an anchor, and the Ghouls that have a bit of a dual role. Then we'll go to the special setup. So you have the Dark Coach and the Court of the Damned. They're both constructs. They're both large constructs, and the Court has Towering Presence, and the Monstrous Revenant that we talked about before also has Towering Presence. So the Monstrous Revenant can go behind the Dark Coach. If it does so, then it's going to get soft cover from any units on the other side. It can also go behind the Court of the Damned to hide, and then the line of sight will be blocked. Same as with the Shrieking Horror, which is gigantic, so the Monstrous Revenant can hide behind that one. The Dark Coach is quite important in the list because, well, the Dark Coach in general is quite a sturdy piece. First time that I looked at it, I was not that impressed by it because in the end you only have 2 attacks at offensive 3 with strength 5, AP 10 at agility 0 because of the great weapon, and you have 4 attacks at offensive 6, strength 5. It's not too impressive. For 465 points, basically you're paying that for 6 attacks. However, where it shines is basically the Vampiric 3+ on the Vampire in combination with 5 hit points with Resilience 5 with Armor 4 and the Magus 4+. So it is quite a sturdy piece, and the main power comes from the fact that if the Vampire does at least 1 wound on a 3+, you're going to get a wound back. And these are quite valuable wounds, so it's really a good grinding piece, as long as you don't put it up against something with a lot of static combat res, basically, you're going to be fine. The other effect that the Dark Coach has is that friendly units within 6 inches gain autonomous, and that is really important in a movement heavy list. So the raids that we're going to talk about later, they're going to be the most important piece here, together with the Shrieking Horror. So the Monstrous Revenant already does help because you have quite some mobility with the Revenant, and you have an 18-inch bubble in which you can march. However, for those cases where that is not enough, or when you want to play on 2 flanks, the Dark Coach is going to be there for you. So basically, in the end, this list really focuses on 1 Monstrous Revenant, 1 Dark Coach, the Shrieking Horror, and the 2 big units of raids. And then the core with the Court of the Damned is going to be just support, basically, or distraction in the middle of the field for your opponent. Then to the last bits of the list, we're going to look at the raids and the Shrieking Horror. So one of these raids that I've been talking about for quite a bit now, they are ghostly form troops with light troops, and the biggest, most important rule that they have is Reaper. So that means that if they can go through enemy units, and I believe only one per turn, but I don't know if there's a limit to it. But they can move through enemy units with their light troops, so they're quite mobile at doing that, with a march of 12 inches also. And if they do so, then every single model in your unit can make one attack, or one hit, I believe, even, at the strength of the user, so that's going to be strength 5 with the great weapon, and the AP of the user, so that's going to be AP 10, onto the enemy unit. So if you march these units through a unit of knights, you're going to inflict 5, 8, or 10, depending on the unit size. Strength 5 hits with AP 10, and that is generally not something that people are really enthusiastic about. In addition, if you use some magical movement, like with the Unholy Tome or the Witchcraft Ravenswing, you can also do this this Reaper attack. And with Ravenswing, I believe it's even in addition to the damage that you can get from Ravenswing, so that will be another D6 strength 4. Normally you should count on being able to do this once per turn, with the magic setup as I showed here. If you go really magic heavy, then you might be able to pull it off twice a turn, but then again, the stars also have to align a little bit for you to be able to position them in such a way that they're going to be able to do so. And if you have an opponent that knows what you're doing, he's going to be really careful of where he puts his troops. Yeah, that's going to be the main strike power of the list. And in combat, I would say they're a little bit less good, but they're still quite good. Because they have a 3 up Aegis against non-magical attacks, so anything that doesn't have too many attacks, they're going to be fine dealing with, because they are going to strike back with 2 attacks each, only with offensive 3, so they do also really benefit from Ancestral Aid for a reroll to it. But then again, it's going to be with strength 5, AP 10. So there's no discussion about whether these hits are going to deal any damage or not. The only thing that the list doesn't cover so far that well is something to deal with monsters that you wouldn't necessarily want to deal with in combat. As long as you're talking about monsters with like resilience 6 or higher, because otherwise the raids can really deal with them quite well. And for that reason, we include a Shrieking Horror in the list. The Shrieking Horror is normally Fire and Forget missile, because you can fly 16 inches with it, and then you have a Chilling Shriek that has 8-inch range, and March and Shoot. So that's 24 inches of threat range. However, you are going to move 16 inches towards the target. You're going to be within 8 inches of the target, and your opponent does have some counterplay in that, because you can basically stay away from the Shrieking Horror in such a way that if you go to try and take out his piece, then your Shrieking Horror is going to suffer afterwards. And the Shrieking Horror itself is just 500 points already, so that is quite expensive for just a monster. Basically, if you manage to get somewhere where you can deal some damage on an enemy monster, you're gonna, or any other unit basically for that regard, you're gonna inflict 1 hit for each health point your Shrieking Horror has. They are always strength 10, AP 10 magical attacks, and you use the enemy discipline instead of the resilience. So once again, Whispers of the Veil comes in with the -1 resilience, -1 discipline, sorry, to combine with this. And yeah, it starts out with 6 hit points, so you're gonna initially in the game be able to just put 6 wounds anywhere, 6 or 5 wounds, regardless of resilience, and that is quite an interesting thing to do. I mean, a steam tank, you can just shriek it to death. You can also use it as a combat attack, and then you're still going to do the same thing. So you're still going to do a couple of wounds to something in combat. It is a gigantic beast, so it also does still have a thunderstorm at strength 5, so against most infantry it's still going to hold its ground. The only downside of is obviously that you have to move somewhere, you're going to do your ranged attack, and then likely the Shrieking Horror is going to die. However, if you have Raven's Wing or the Unholy Tome movement available to you, then it might be manageable, because then you can suddenly move a little bit more with it before you have to scream. So you might be able to get in these spots where you're gonna be able to perform. So in the end, the list has a total of 3 pieces that rely quite heavily on Raven's Wing or Van Elt's Danse Macabre. Yeah, I think it's a cool list. I would be willing to try it out myself, actually. I think I have actually the models for it, so I might as well do it one day. Yeah, I think this is a cool way to build a Lamia list. It's way different from the Nosferatu list that we saw before, being way more mobile also. Even though your core has to be filled with infantry in Vampire Covenant. Yeah, it's also a bit different maybe from some other Lamia lists that you have seen, but I think that this is the real strength of Lamia. So there we go. Yeah, so as promised, I will do in the future some videos about deployment and how to tackle some difficult situations. But for now, I'll just first do a series of different Vampire Covenant lists, and then once we've gone through all the bloodlines and the independent one, we'll go to the other videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you the next time.